first event that I'm presenting at. I'm a new community leader for the Lansing Community Chapter. So I'm excited to be here with all of you guys. And today we're going to be jumping in and talking about getting started with Jira Service Management. If I can figure out how to share my screen here. All right. All right. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
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 Thank you. All right. So my name is Tyler Kosowski. I am an Atlassian consultant for a company called Kunzli & Associates. And like I already mentioned, I'm the Lansing community co-leader with Sam here as well, and soon to be Erica.
Oh, congratulations.
So I have a couple of different goals to set up for what this event is going to look like. And the first goal, pretty obvious, discover what Jira Service Management is. I know that at this point, a lot of people do know what it is. It's been a little while since it came out, but it's definitely been developing over the last couple of years, originally starting as a service management tool, but becoming a little bit more. So for those that haven't been using it in their everyday lives, or people that are here that it might be new for the first time, we'll go over some of the basics for you. We'll also be talking about how to understand how to create a Jira Service Management project, making sure you know the ins and outs before you actually create a project itself. And one of the key aspects that we like to have here at the Lansing Unity events is making sure that not only are we presenting, but we're also communicating with each other, sharing ideas, experiences, having a good laugh at our own expenses sometimes, and just connecting with, hey, here's my experience with creating these new different projects. And the last goal here is to actually create a project with you guys. So those are going to be our goals for today. So starting off with, what is Jira Service Management? And I came up with this definition on my own. You have no idea how entirely difficult it is to not reuse the word service inside of the definition for Jira Service Management. But essentially, it's Atlassian's solution for providing help desk style assistance to customers. And that's a pretty generic definition of what it really is. Because it's now expanding across all different types of service management, whether that be inside of IT management, HR management, things like employee onboarding and offboarding, and stuff like that. And for those who have not seen Jira Service Management, here's a couple of screenshots for you. And one of the big things that Jira Service Management includes that makes it different from other Jira offerings, which is not quite as true every day now, but it has a customer-facing portal that allows them to create requests directly. And what you're seeing here is actually the help center for those portals where your customers are able to submit those requests. And we'll get into the live version of that later on here. The other main aspect of your Jira Service Management is how your users, your agents are actually going in, reviewing the tickets that are being sent in by your customers and how they're actually providing those services. So there's a couple of different things before you get started on creating your Jira Service Management project. And we're going to talk about what some of those things are. And they're almost a level of principles that you should be following before you start creating your Jira projects. And kind of as a note before we get into this section here, I want to try and hit it from two different aspects. I know that we have some administrators on the line with us here and here in person, but I also know that not all of you are administrators, not all of you are even project administrators. Some of you are just users of the Jira system. So I want to try and get both views of that, right? But before you get started, I love this saying here: creating a new project never begins by creating a new project. The creating the project is, in my opinion, one of the easiest things you can do because Atlassian's made it so simple, and you can spin up a new one in less than 5 minutes if you already have all the answers. So the first thing that I like to do when approaching a new Jira project, whether that be on the consulting side where we have an outside entity, or even a internal project that I'm working on, say for example, HR requesting for an employee onboarding solution, or a request system for your IT management team. Here are a couple of questions that I like to use in order to get the information that I need. And what exactly that information is, we'll look at it at the later slide. So the first question is probably, do they need a JSM project? So there's a lot of Atlassian solutions out there, with the main three being Jira Software, aimed primarily at your development projects, which was their kind of original project management solution there. Or I want to be careful using the word project management, but their development cycle solution. Jira Work Management, which is their newer, slimmed down version for project management in particular, using a more generic approach. And then you have your Jira Service Management projects as well, which aims more towards actually providing customer service request response. And so one of the questions you want to ask there is, do you have a customer that needs to submit a request? So that might be a good indicator if you actually need a Jira Service Management project. Otherwise, you might want to look into other solutions. So if you have a development aspect, you might want to consider Jira Software. If you don't have anything in particular, such as development, you might want to consider a Jira Work Management project instead. What type of JSM project do they need? Are you taking in for example, a hardware issue? Or are you only taking in user password problems? Are you having people request new assets, for example? And that's actually one of the other questions that I have on here is, are you going to be managing assets? So this is going to start to pick apart what the scope of your project is going to look like. And you want to make sure that you're asking all of the questions that you have before you actually start jumping into creating the project. Because once you do create that project, it becomes a little bit more difficult to roll things back and say, hey, I forgot to ask you this, that I may accidentally have to restructure my workflow because we didn't have all the right information.
Right.
So based on these questions, what questions do you guys usually ask when you're thinking about creating projects? Or if you've been on a team that set up their own projects, what kind of questions has your administrator asked you?
I always like to ask, what do you hope to get out of this?
That's a good one.
Because it's different than what you're going to use it for. It's like, what problem do you hope to solve?
Oh, yeah. What answers have you gotten?
And it really vastly depends, but I've found that sometimes if you ask that question first, it helps you decide whether or not this is the right place to start.
Right. Yeah, like traceability and audit. A lot of times, if the system itself isn't going to improve the process, it's the ability to track the process. Reporting, like we talked about dashboards and other kinds of exports. Is that what they want out of it? And what kind of reporting are they looking for? Like, who's your audience, right? Whether you have an external customer or it's all internal, often guides how strict that is. Definitely your comment about not changing things in the future. If you change stuff while you're still planning it out, it's a lot easier than having to retrain all of your users. And that I'm going through that again on a project right now for probably the 8th time. And then we got the migration, so that'll be a forced retraining as well. So yeah, it's fun. But definitely I almost feel like these questions are precluded by the do you need it question. But I also think do you need it and what do you hope to get out of it kind of are good alternative questions as well. Do you need a help desk solution? Is that going to add more overhead that you can't manage with your team size? Do you have somebody to watch that and manage that outside of, let's say, your standard Jira project? Or should requests be going through your Jira project? Like, it's all,
Well,
is the overhead worth the throughput?
and I find asking, what do you hope to get out of it, especially since it's not a yes or no question,
Yes.
is kind of forcing them to articulate their thoughts in a way that maybe they hadn't before somebody came in and said, hey, we need this. And you're like, okay, well, what were you hoping to get out of it? And they're like, I don't know, but somebody told me we needed it.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I want to respond to your comment, Troy, because the idea that you do want to aim to try and get it right the first time. The harsh truth is people don't always know what they need it for anyway.
Right, even if you
Or-
do a good job
Yeah.
talking to them.
And the interesting thing I found out about the Jira ecosystem in general is that when they moved from a system that was bad previously, that was restrictive, and said this is the way you have to do things, and then you get this more free form, more powerful system, people start having better ideas about how they can run their workflows.
They didn't even know they could do that until they got in there and started using it.
Yeah, so that's one aspect I like to remember is you're probably not gonna get it perfect the first time. You're gonna want to still open yourself up to some changes later on down the line to make the solution the best it possibly can be for the team you're implementing it for. Right?
Kind of a spin on your second question. I haven't had much success when I've asked a question along those lines. And it's not a bad question, it's a very good question, but for me personally, I like, it's easier for me to pick up on things if it's presented in more like a narrative form. So I'll typically say, walk me through what your current process looks like. Like, show me how you provide support right now. And usually when people are explaining stuff to me, they'll include additional details that I would have not known to ask. And then that gives me some ideas about, I'll keep this in mind for a potential future configuration. So,
Yeah.
And that also helps with the whole, I don't know why I do it, I just do it this way.
Yes. Yes.
It's the way it's always been done.
Uh-huh.
But can your help desk solution help keep track of how many chickens we have to trade to Jeff to get him to do the work? Is that tracked in
Remind
your
me
ticket?
to tell you the child support chicken story later.
All right, child support chicken, got it.
I think all of us here are going to remind you to tell us that, because
I think we got time for this.
Yeah.
What about online? Does anybody have any questions that they like to ask or have been asked when setting up a new project like this? And the funny thing about this is it's not just relevant to Jira projects either. When you're setting up any kind of project, you might want to ask some of these questions to get a good handle on your understanding of what they're trying to do. So this is kind of a larger principle that you can use in other places.
Yeah, regardless of the solution, it's how you approach this kind of effort.
Yeah, exactly. So Sam, your point actually leads into something that we'll talk about a little bit later because I changed the order of my slides here. But these these are the configuration checklist items that I personally use when I'm coming into setting up a new Jira Service Management project. And all the questions that I ask, I don't necessarily use these terms when I'm asking them because a lot of times those teams, they're not familiar with the ins and outs and the terminology that Jira specifically uses, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I'm aiming to figure out what kind of issue types that they're gonna be having, right? So these are the different kinds of workflows and things like that, that these items are gonna be attached to. We're gonna be talking about what kind of request types and what sort of services that they are trying to support their customers on, and then the request forms and fields, how they need to get the information from that customer, how things are gonna move through their workflows and what the processes are gonna be like, the queues, how the actual agents themselves are gonna start supporting tickets and what their views are gonna look like. And now I think I'll have to add to this because now JSM boards are in general availability, so you have that option as well. And then the final question that I always like to ask is what kind of behaviors and automation can we build into this this project? Now, this last question is one I don't like to focus on too much. Every team that I've talked with has said to me, usually this person manages the tickets, or this person or this group of people gets assigned this type of ticket. So a lot of times I'll look for an automation that we can set up to automatically make assignees. But I want to also listen to anything inside of their workflows that Jira might not be able to do and try and head that off through automation during this process. Do you guys have any other things that you would aim to check off your configuration list by asking those questions?
Kind of along the line of this person always gets assigned this is like hierarchy or access. You know, are there certain people that are the only people that can do a specific thing, or any other kind of restrictions, audits, that kind of stuff is like, what can this tool do to help facilitate that, or does it have to remain a business process? A lot of times with automation and like at least not in JSM, but in Jira proper.
And I would add, sort of dovetailing off of that, regulatory requirements.
Yeah.
Like when you're doing the configuration, you have to make sure it's great to automate something, but is that automation going to produce the audit trail that's required by the industry that you're in?
Right. We have a step in our project where for audit, a specific group of people at the state have to have pressed the approve button, but we didn't like that they would do the approve and then we'd have to manually move it over to ready for development. And so we have just a quick step that automates after they press the button. So we have the audit trail that so-and-so pressed the button, but then we don't, like we can automate after
Having
that.
worked in many industries that are highly regulated, you always have to ask about that, because it's another one of those things when people are working in that industry, they don't think to mention it to you because it's just such a part of the background for them. But like, oh no, these are things that by law we have to do. And you don't want to skip that in your process if they need an audit log, or if somebody physically has to press the button and you can't automate that piece.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing when you're coming in as a Jira admin. You have to go from knowing absolutely nothing about a team to being the one that knows almost the most. Because otherwise, if you're not an expert on their processes, how can you support them at all? So yeah, that's a really good point. And those are the kinds of things that you want to aim to get out of these questions. And like Sam said, how you phrase those things is really important too, to start drawing those smaller things out. Yeah. And that brings us perfectly into this slide here. Make sure you're using the right terminology. So a lot of teams that you're going to be working with, or teams that you're on, their terminology for the things that they do is going to be different than how Atlassian describes them. And I have some key ones in here. And the one I actually struggle with a lot is issues versus tasks. So as some of us might know, Atlassian officially calls their see, now this is where it gets difficult.
They call their tasks
They call-
issues.
They call their tasks issues. And then you can also have tasks as default issue types, right? So there's a lot of confusion around there. And what I like to do to approach this, and I'm also looking for suggestions here because I seem to struggle with this almost every team, is slowly introducing the word issues to them, and sort of merging your terminology with theirs. And then finally, and this is sort of a lower level thing that I do, slowly move them over to only using the word issues so that you're kind of pulling them from their processes where they use the word task all the time to describe essentially the same thing into using the word issues. And this applies for a couple of different things inside of Atlassian as well. For example, workflow versus a process. They're essentially the same thing, slightly different wording. And then some of the other things here that I have listed. What is a help center versus a portal? This is one that seems to confuse the people that you're working with a lot. And in the Atlassian, the help center is the broader spectrum of all of your portals. So the help center is the container of portals. And if we have some time later, we can take a look at exactly what that looks like. And then one thing I like to describe inside of Jira Service Management in particular is what an incident is versus a service. Jira Service Management has a couple of different features that you can use, namely incident, service, changes, and problems. Those are kind of the big four there. And when you're coming from a more traditional, and I'm speaking about information technology service management specifically, they will just have one type of thing, which is like a service that they're providing for their customer. But now you're trying to separate those things out into your incidences, which is traditionally items that are going wrong and need fixed, versus a service, which is a request from the customer for something new or additional, or a change that might not be interrupting service. So that's kind of an interesting conversation to have with your customers or the team that you're working with on making this project. And then some other terminology things is agents versus customers. So throughout this presentation here, I've actually used both of these words, and the agents is one that trips people up a lot, which is just their users. Who is actually inside the Jira Service Management project that is taking the requests and completing them, whereas your customers are the ones who are submitting the requests into the system. Do you guys have any terminology differences that you've seen used in your different projects?
Well, you got when somebody's moving from Bugzilla into Jira software, everything in Bugzilla is a bug, period. No matter what form or request it takes, it only has one word and it's synonymous with issue, but they don't striate. And so I run into that all the time because now bugs are a specific type of issue. And then ticket, issue, task.
Tickets.
Because when you're in help desk, a lot of times there's also the term ticket. And so where
And I'll add to that card,
yeah,
people who are
Trello
using
card.
things like Trello or a more physical Scrum board, we'll often call them cards.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, and then my kind of pushback almost to the first line item there is the idea of trying to get everybody on the same page is good, but only if it matters, I guess. If they're saying ticket and you're saying issue and you both understand each other, I'm less worried about them getting to say the term that I need, as long as it's uniform. But it gets hard when task or bug is that word because it's the definition. And I would think, at least in the software one, maybe we just don't use the term bug. If it's that hard for people, you can use something else, but that's standards. But agents and customers, that's a good distinction to have. I don't see them being synonymous, but so much what their roles are. And some people don't think of internals as customers, but they are.
Mhm. Yeah, that will trick people up because the word customer is like weird when it's the person that sits next to you.
Yeah, it's a good hospitality rule is that you have two types of customers. You have the guests that are coming into the hotel, but everyone you work with is also a customer, and you give them the same level of service as you would somebody who's coming into the hotel as a guest. And that way, just like you keep that 5-star going. And so I like to think of that with help desk is that everybody's a customer, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. You don't say, oh, they're a customer and I can ignore them because they're all the same. It's no, I would give the same level of service internally as I would externally, and that should be a positive statement, ideally.
Yeah. And also, you might want to give a little bit better service to the internals because they can reach you.
Well, ideally, there's no difference.
Yeah,
Not just
yeah.
because it's a physical threat.
Right.
I know where you sit, and more importantly, I know when you're sitting there.
It's not gonna get your printer fixed any faster.
Funny thing happened to the network where your laptop's concerned, yes.
All right. So this is another principle that I like to live by when developing these new JSM projects. And again, I think this applies across all projects in general. Keep things simple until you can. So like we mentioned before, keeping an eye out for automations can be good, but if you're building this very complex system that nobody wants to adapt, it's going to be really difficult. So it's better to kind of keep things a little bit lower level, make sure it's accurate to their processes, but don't start adding a bunch of flair everywhere you have the opportunity. And a lot of times, in my experience, during these processes, people are excited about these new awesome tools that they're going to have. They've got access to automations. They've got access to these cool queues. They've got access to this portal, and they can ask the customer for any information that they want, and they can make all these things required. But what you do by doing that is make the system overly complex, and you lose adoption. What I have seen people try to do is let's make it perfect the first time. And like we talked about earlier, that's not always the best solution.
Nope.
So making sure you can continue to continuously update your processes is likely going to be the best way to go, because then it's not big sweeping changes at once. Now, of course, that has the downside of we're constantly changing our processes and we're messing up our agents. They used to do it this way. Now there's an additional workflow step that they have to do. And sometimes retraining them can be difficult as well. So you want to kind of balance those positive and negatives. So does anybody have an example of like when this would be a problem?
Oh, I was just thinking about the 80-20 rule, is that, and you learn about this a lot when you're in like training development and things like that, is that your users only need about 80%, like 80% of your users are gonna do the simplified thing. The problem you run into is the other 20%. When they're the ones who have these complex needs, these advanced scenarios that they're dealing with. And if you try to delve too hard into that 20%, you're ignoring the other 80% who don't need that at all. So it's like, you kind of have a balancing act at that point where it's like, are we designing this for the 80% of users, or are we designing it for the 20% that are screaming at us that they need this very hyper-specific, very complex process?
And would making that very hyper-specific, complex thing impact those other users? Like if it can be separate concerns, maybe it's not too bad, but it depends. Like if you're making a major change to the workflow that adds 4 extra steps for everybody else who doesn't need it, then it becomes a problem.
And I've run into a lot of situations where somebody comes up with a hypothetical and says, we have to figure out how to make the system bulletproof against this hypothetical scenario that I've conceived of.
Yeah.
And it's like, but does that ever actually happen? And is it worth the effort to try to avoid this scenario that you don't actually have any concrete proof has ever happened? Like sometimes it is, depending on, you know, like
the criticality of
the
if it does
criticality of
happen.
that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, do you really want to, like I said, it's the 80-20 thing. Do you really want to spend all of your time accommodating these edge cases only to impact the 80% that are really gonna be using it day to day?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is it's like the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Mhm.
The loudest people that complain the most
Get accommodated.
yeah, exactly, get accommodated. And then it almost becomes political. It's like, I am going to work with you to not stir the pot.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think one of the challenges of keeping things simple is if you leave out that second part, because the until you can't is really important. If you're just too dogmatic about simplicity and you don't do it right, you can almost end up antagonistic with the people that you're trying to create something for. Like following standards and practices and trying to guide them to a sane solution is good, but where it's not detrimental to them, to customize it a little bit or allow one extra status, although that's asking a bit, or allow like a little bit of movement on the names of issue types where it makes sense, where it serves a purpose, can also almost politically ease it, help them feel like they have some ownership, so being too dogmatic can be detrimental. So that until you can is really important. And where you say that until is, like, is it, the umpteenth last straw, or do you work with them throughout to kind of ease things through?
You gotta pick your battles.
Oh, yeah.
Cause you want that buy-in.
Yep.
Yeah, buy-in is really important.
And at the end of the day, you have a lot of roads to the same solution. It doesn't have to be the one way you think about it. And being able to put yourself in somebody else's mental model is a really important skill. Because just because it's not the way that you would do it doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong, but you need to make sure it serves the purpose and that the other users are going to be served by it as well. But at first you'd be like, that just doesn't mesh with the way my brain works. I don't like it. That doesn't mean that it's not okay.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point too, because what you have to remember about implementing a new project for anybody is it's change. And historically, humans hate change. There's always going to be people on that project that have a lot of excitement, right? They're like, oh yeah, this is going to be the best thing ever. It's going to make things nice and smooth and modernize it. But there's also going to be people that are afraid of any change. He's like, I know how I do my work now. Don't mess with it because this is what's working for me.
One of the most profound things I ever heard said was, a confused mind always says no. And it's like, are they really saying no? Or are they just confused, so they're telling you no because they don't understand what you're asking?
Right.
Or what you're giving them.
That's really interesting you say that, because recently I actually had a client come to me and say, and so typically how our sessions will work is we'll build out a configuration report, and then we will actually build the project for them, kind of in the similar model that we're talking about today. But what they requested is to be trained on what the module can do first before implementing and talking about workflows or anything like that. And to your point, to try and confuse them less by them having some of that upfront information so that they can make that decision a little bit better for themselves, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. And I haven't gotten to play with it at all yet, but just the fact of maybe we should give them a little bit more information so that they can give us better information. So we'll have to see how that works out. I would love to hear a little bit from the virtual folks, if you guys have any times where you made things a little bit more complex than they needed to be and ended up with some issues. Because I know that it's happened to just about all of us. I mean, I know, Jeff, you're probably sitting over there going, everything's too complex.
Oh, it's old dog, new tricks. No. Do we use JSM for our web help desk? Okay, it sounded like it had to be. I've never heard him say that. Okay.
Yep, that's a Jira service management project. And the main indicator is that it has that customer portal side of things so that you can manage those service requests that come in.
Yeah.
Okay. So next I'm gonna go ahead and say, hey, we've gotten all the answers to all of our questions. We've been talking to them about some terminology. We understand what their workflows are gonna be looking like. We understand what project type that they need. They're gonna have customers that are gonna be putting in requests into the portal. And I'm gonna go ahead and show you exactly how to create a Jira Service Management project. And by extension, also go through some of the settings that you want to take a look at and maybe some follow-up questions you might need to be asking. Because inevitably, you're gonna ask all these questions, right? And you're still not gonna get all the answers. So inside of here, this is my demo environment. So I can play around in here as much as I'd like. If you're gonna create a new project, all you have to do is up in the top bar here, and you do have to be a Jira administrator to start a new project, and you hit create. So from here, Atlassian's made it super simple to help you determine what kind of project you can create. And from here, you can make a Jira work management project, you can make a service management project, software management, whatever you need. So we're gonna focus on the service management section here first today. Thank you. So they give you a couple of templates to work from, and it lists what the template is and then what type of project you'd be creating. And of course, in this list, it's all service management related. So what is the difference of these different templates? Well, we can click into them and see. And it's basically a package of different request types, workflows, and things like that that allow you to get a project spun up a lot faster. So this IT service management template in particular is going to give you some service requests and incident requests, as well as problem requests and change requests down here at the bottom. And then also some de facto automations that it includes as well. So if we go ahead and take a look at another one, we'll go to our service management, for example. So this is going to give you a different set of request types. So this focuses on employee onboarding and offboarding, or questions for HR that you would send to different people, you would put through different automations, things like that. So, and inside of each of these templates, it'll describe the different things that you can manage through this service management template. So these are quite cool. For today, I'm going to go ahead and choose the IT service management one. And one interesting thing that I was thinking about as I was building out this presentation is how Jira Service Management has become this more powerful product. Originally, it was for IT service management, right? The project that we're going to be creating here, but it's also been expanding to all different kinds of projects, HR, marketing, whatever team needs to be doing stuff like this. Well, the irony that I find some humor in is Jira Software started off that way too. It was aimed towards development projects, and then other teams were using it too. Just last week, I converted a requirements project from a software type into a business type before migrating it over into the cloud. So people are desperate for these kind of tools. That's what I'm seeing from that is I want to be able to manage my stuff. Jira software worked well enough. Now we're going into Jira Service Management. And while the idea is that they're providing service, it is kind of coming out of its shell and expanding to other different types of teams with this focus around providing and serving customer requests. And on the back end, it really doesn't matter anymore what the project is for. They're giving you all the tools. And I think one indicator of that is, like I mentioned before, the new boards tool inside of Jira Service Management, which I think is really cool. Because your service teams like boards. They came from Jira software probably. So they want to see some of that similarities to make them feel maybe a little bit more comfortable. And also, if you're asking me as an ex-developer, boards are easy to use. So So we're gonna go ahead and create this project. So the things we're gonna need a name. It's automatically gonna generate a key for us. So I'm going to say ACE Community Project. And it's going to generate that ATP key. So the next thing here is the team type. And you might be saying, Tyler, what is team type? What is this going to do for us? So this helps Atlassian customize your project setup experience, or at least that's what it tells us. Based on what I can find online, nobody knows what the team type really does. Does anybody have an idea of what it does? I truly am looking for an answer.
No familiarity.
I guess you have to determine who us is.
Yeah.
Help us determine, it's like, who is, this is a matter of like, who's actually putting this together, or it does force your client to think about, well, what exactly it is, but.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it to be able to tell you like what purpose that serves within the software.
But as for, the software is going to pick the following, doesn't sound like it's been doing it from what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, all of that basic stuff is decided by the template. And as far as I can tell, you can't change the team type after you create one, but I would love for somebody to correct me if you do know.
Does it give you, there's, I can't tell, is there a drop down, or is it just
Yep.
free form?
So there's a drop down with a number of different team
Okay.
types: human resources, legal, finance, software development, things like that.
But
So
nothing changes.
as far as I can tell, but I would love to be corrected.
Yeah.
It just gives the
It doesn't do
illusion.
anything.
It doesn't do
It doesn't.
anything. That's I
I
found
think
it-
I think it's just for informational purposes only.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what I'm
Yeah,
finding.
yeah.
And probably
Case
the same
people-
search that you did.
yeah.
People forget what they're doing.
Yeah.
Giving you
Oh.
resources, that's true.
Well, but you could be looking at a list of teams and going, what doesn't that team do?
Yeah,
Because
does
I
it show
know,
up as a field on the grid or anything?
because once you start letting them name their teams.
Oh, yeah.
So Lori says, is it similar to how category works in Jira software?
Might be.
Possibly.
Okay.
If you were managing multiples across an organization, some kind of distinction might be helpful, or if you're auditing out to an external, but it seems largely informational.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So
It's weird that it's locked though, after you create it.
we probably spent way more time than needed on something that might not do anything. One thing we haven't talked about yet is during those questions, you want to make sure that you're asking who is this going to be available to, and make sure that you set your permissions properly. As far as who can request this, who's going to have access to do different things inside of the system, identifying who your project administrators are. You want to do all of those sort of things. So, and also who can be submitting requests, right? Do you have a specific group of customers, or is it just anybody? Are you gonna make it available to the public? So you're gonna wanna determine the channel access here when you are creating your new project. For now, we'll just go ahead and set it to restricted. And we see our template here, and then under the show more section, it will ask you what your project type is gonna be. And it looks like, so your template is gonna determine what type of project it's gonna be. So if you're choosing a blank project, you can actually select your project type. And for those who may not know, there are two types of projects. You have a company managed project and a team managed project. And the main difference is there, I won't spend a lot of time going over these today, but the main project is your company managed are going to be managed primarily like by your Jira administrators. So keeping that, the changes to workflows and fields and stuff like that kind of at a higher level, or your team managed projects are aimed at teams that can be more self-sufficient, allows them to manage their own workflows and create their own fields. And typically you would give these previously known as next gen projects, which are your team managed projects, a little bit more autonomy, if you will. So for your company managed projects, you would actually have to have them put in a request of some type, maybe into your own JSM project that you set up your Jira administrators, to make a workflow change request. So.
And that restriction only applies to the IT service management template. So the nature of that template is it's all encompassing for a larger IT support team. So that's something you wouldn't want to localize to the team itself. You'd want some centralized oversight. So that's the only restriction. But any of the other templates you select, you'd have the option to choose between what Tyler was saying, company or team managed.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and create this project, and that really is as easy as it is. So we're done, we can go now, right?
You just throw it at the agents and walk away.
Yeah. Yep, just give them access and that's it.
Yeah.
So I want to point out a couple of things here. So because we picked that template along this side, it's enabled a couple of different features for us. So we have a board by default that is going to be pretty simple. I think we could do an entirely separate ACE event just on these new boards inside of JSM, but so I'm gonna leave these kind of for another day. But the more traditional things that we see service request queues, incidents, problems, changes, and also post-incident reviews, which I hadn't really mentioned yet. But you can enable or disable these features, but the ones that are enabled are just based on the template that you choose. So if it was blank, you wouldn't have any of them and you'd have to go into your settings and change them. And then you can also see some additional features down here: calendars, services, alerts, and on call. And what I am gonna do for this demo here, now that we do technically have a project created, is I'm gonna go into the project settings and hopefully give us an opportunity here to talk about the other questions and things that you need to be configuring inside of your Jira service management project. So going down the line here, we just talked about this, who is gonna have access to your project? So who are the people that you need to be naming and in what roles? Also talking about the features. Which features does your JSM project need? Are they going to be managing service requests? Are they taking in incident management requests? Do they manage problems? Do they manage change management? Do you want to simplify those and have them all just come into one queue? So these are the kind of questions that you want to be asking yourself. And there's also some additional features here that I won't go into too much detail on. So operations, alerts, on call, all of those are connecting to either your assets or into your Ops Genie alerts. And then down here we have where you can turn on the new boards. I don't think these boards are enabled by default, so you do have to turn them on if you have an existing product. But it looks like it turns them on automatically now for new projects. And also a similar requests panel. So these are all different features that you can think about and talk about with the person that you're setting up the team with. And also for those that are on teams that might not have some of these features, it might be the opportunity to reach out to your admins and say, hey, I'd like a similar request panel, or I'd like a board on my JSM project. Any questions on some of these features? I will say that I'm most well-versed in the service management, incident management, problem management, and change management. So this section up here, I don't have a lot of experience with some of these lower features as much. Okay. So some of the other things that we talked about earlier in our configuration checklist: issue types. What kind of issues do you expect to come in through your system? And by default on this template, we're gonna see some that we probably expect, right? Your problem, your change, your incident management, your service requests. And then it also adds a couple of other ones in here for tasks and subtasks. And you can see it's already matched it up with a couple of different work roles. And out of the box, some of these workflows may or may not work for you or the team that you're setting things up in. So what I actually like to do is take some of these. Oh, that's a really interesting looking one.
They have that default spill out.
Yeah.
Now, for like some of these issue types and whatnot, do they need to match up to like things that are in Jira? Or is this totally independent of what Jira might be doing?
I'm
So
not sure.
The JSM is independent of like the Jira software project. So like
Yes.
your help desk ticket issue types can be totally different because this is a different
Okay.
ecosystem
Okay,
of managing things. This is, my printer doesn't work, I need access to this thing, and they can, but they don't necessarily go into then the software thing where I'd have like a task to go do something. These are in their own ecosystem of remedy. But if they were to result in a development item, it might be nice to have them one-to-one between the environments, and that would be a decision to make.
okay, yeah, I just thought I'd ask that, because I didn't know like if they needed to match up so that it could talk to Jira or something.
Yeah, and that's a great point actually. So these workflows and workflow schemes and the screens that you're building, the issue types that you have in your system, those are all global, right? So those will work for your Jira software and your Jira service management system as well. So you can either decide to create new issue types, or you can reuse the ones that you're using in software, and you can even reuse those workflows too, just depending on how you assign them to your issue types inside of your project.
But they don't need to align with your software project because it's its own ecosystem.
Yep.
Unless you're using them very much, like right on the layer of a development team. I could see you wanting them to be kind of the same. But then there's the question, is JSM even needed? You know, if it's gonna be kind of through the same workflow.
Yeah. And I have heard some rumblings that they are building some forms inside of Jira software as well, so that you can take some of those lighter requests. But I haven't heard anything since the original announcement, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Help guide a template for bug submission more so.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting thing to me is they built this separate software piece, but they're also building some of those features into Jira software that might make this new product irrelevant, which, I mean, there must be a reason.
It's like you prove it out in this other space, but then you see the use case similarity, but like almost answering what I was just saying, where it's too close to it. Do we need a whole nother solution? It won't invalidate it if you have separate people to handle the overhead of IT help desk, for example, and you have enough throughput that's valid. And there's some tickets I get right now on my software project that I wish we had a help desk layer. Rather than having our customers come into software and spin up bugs, I'd rather have one person or two that I paid to get help desk tickets and translate that into bugs like I used to do at a previous job. But it all depends on your flow through, your relationship with the client, how many people you have around, because it's more people. If you're a small team of 6, that's somebody's job.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about licensing with JSM in particular is your customers are not licensed. Only the people actually working your tickets are, so your agents. So if you have even 5 customers, but you only have a 5-person support team, that keeps you in that free user tier, so that you don't have to be paying for all of your customers, where in Jira software, you pay for everybody.
Right.
So depending on what your team structure looks like, it might make a lot more sense and it might be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
So, Jeannie, yeah, this will be made available on where is it on the YouTube page?
Yes.
On the YouTube channel? And maybe you could drop a link in the chat for that too, Sam.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. So yeah, you want to be asking about your workflows, and you'll probably spend a lot of time doing this. And what I like to do is have a workflow base that I can show them. So I'll actually take this workflow, I'd clean it up, I'd pull it apart a little bit more, so it's a little bit easier to understand. But I'd show them and say, hey, this is how you might be able to do your change management inside of Jira Service Management. Looking at this workflow, I might make some changes before, depending on the conversations that we've had, but it really helps, in my experience, to give them a visual aid and say, here's how things could move through the system, or this is what your process would look like inside of the system. Does this make sense to us? And one important thing that I keep in mind is, at this point, I'm not an expert, they are. So you want to be careful about how you're coming into creating this project with your own ideas. Make sure that's not too locked down and that you're ready to take those ideas and translate them really into how your workflows going to be working.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that your workflow scheme is assigned to your issue types properly. You want to make sure that if there's any specific information that you want the teams to be able to see when they're doing different things, creating, editing, or viewing your issues, that you are having those conversations as well. And frankly, I find that managing and creating complex screens right away for customers will confuse them. I want to make sure that I am helping them limit the information that they have to see if it's not always relevant, but at the same time, typically how these, or how I feel about the screens is that doing that right away kind of goes against that principle that we talked about, keeping it simple until you can't. So you want to make sure that you're having these conversations, and so yeah, just making sure that they can see all the information that they need to.
I think expanding a screen can be a little less detrimental on that training standpoint than like workflows and stuff, as far as like SOPs go.
Right.
It's like, here's a new field. Getting them to use it and see it is hard, but it doesn't like screw up the whole thing as long as you don't move too much around.
Yeah. And that's actually a perfect segue into the next section here. So the custom fields. Every project is going to have things that are not going to be out of the box in Jira. Well, I shouldn't say every. That's a little bit too strong a language. But many projects are going to have very specific information that they're collecting. Every team's going to be unique. That's why this system is so powerful and you have the opportunity to do that, right? So typically in my experience, the custom fields will come up when you're talking about creating request type forms. So when you're creating those forms, they'll need a very particular piece of information that the techs are going to need to be able to complete that service request. And I like to build them directly into custom fields. That way they are queryable. Allows you to use the JQL where you could build forms and just collect information and not assign it to a custom field. But that's my preference. And I think we skipped over the request types here. Sure, I don't see them in this list.
You're in the administration panel. You need to go back to the project.
Thank you.
What's the difference between an issue type and a request type? Aren't they the same thing, Tyler?
That's a great question. So the issue types and the request types. The issue types are going to be what your agents see on their queues and how the issue types are moving through the workflows. Now, your request types are what your customers are going to be saying on the portal itself. So that's going to be indicating what kind of information that the customer is going to be pulling in, and that is what you attach your forms to. And for the life of me, I see what I did. I went to the workflows and then clicked on the diagram that brought me there. So if we go back into our project settings here, we can see our request types down here. And it'll actually separate them out into the different work categories or the features that we have enabled. So we see service requests, incidents. And so we can see here that this request type, fix an account problem, is actually linked to the service request issue type. So for the customer, they will see a form that looks something like this, where they will want to enter in the instructions, a summary and a description of the service request that they're having. And for fixing an account problem, we might have some more additional fields such as what their account is or what the account's for, right?
Mhm.
So this is kind of the basis around what a request is versus what your issue types are.
Can a request generate more than one issue type?
Typically, they won't.
It's kind of one to one.
Yes.
Going that way at least.
But if you did need to do something like that, you could set up an automation to say when this request type is created, automatically generate another issue type.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there any more questions on request types versus issue types? Okay. And that is one you want to make sure that you take time to describe to your team as well that you're working with, because that one can be confusing. So in general, the request types the customer sees, the issue types is how the agents are going to be managing the tickets or issues that come in.
Yep, and they're both fundamentally important to this kind of structure, and they're gonna have as many questions, if not more, about the requests as they do the issue types, like how to build them and what they can use them for, and you see the right kind of client just going crazy on this end over the issue type. It's like, I don't care about how the guys work through it. I want to know what I can get out of this side.
Yeah, and that brings me back to the point about custom fields as well, is that's when you're gonna start adding those, because they'll want to add them into these forms, like I was mentioning just now, fixing an account problem. Well, I need to know what type of account they're talking about. Is it a Jira account? Is it their Microsoft account? Is it their Tinder account? I don't know.
Is the issue they're not getting enough likes?
How is that the third thing your mind went to?
Because he's a professional.
That's right. Keep it clean in here. So
This is not only covered by help desk, we contacted the wrong help desk.
And Tinder has their own help desk.
yeah.
But
If it's a slow day in the IT department, maybe you help them with their profile.
Yeah,
Get
well,
more matches.
but the thing is sometimes your customers genuinely do not know
Right.
yes.
that they're barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah, it's on my work phone. It must be a work app.
You said you'd support me in everything.
Oh, the poor Tinder support team must get a lot of those.
Yeah.
I'm not getting any likes. My account is broken.
Well, if you upgrade.
I get more likes. It literally says, and that makes me suspicious. Algorithms.
Oh yeah. So another thing in here is forms. So you can attach forms to your request types, or you can even attach them directly to your issues. So essentially, it's going to be a form builder that you're allowed to put any fields that you want into here, to build anything that's going to be a little bit more complex, right? If you have some quick and easy radio buttons that you want to be building, if you have fields that are dependent on each other, a form is going to be where you're going to do that. I think we'll go into detail on these a little bit more in another session. So I'm going to go ahead and skip past those. But forms can be really powerful and a great way to get additional information in a more featureful way from your customers. You want to talk about any external resources. So if you have anything that you want your portal to be linked to, such as an external knowledge base, you can link them here. So you want to make sure that you're asking the question, hey, is there anything else that your customers can go see? Do you have, for example, an intranet that you're using? Out of the box, Jira Service Management does come with a lightweight Confluence-like system that allows you to have any documents that you want your customers to be able to see and search from the portal. You can do that through that. But if you have any additional resources, this is where you want to add them.
Do you know how secure that is? Like a lot, like with the state, they don't want to access any like Google Drives. Would that light Confluence area be secure enough that the state would be able to access that? Do you know?
So that is a good question. The Confluence would follow the same data residency as your JSM project.
Okay. Okay, so if they can use Jira, they can use this Confluence Lite.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool.
Yep. And also, if we skip ahead a little bit, you can actually connect this Confluence Lite, or you can even use a full-blown Confluence, and then you can control where the Confluence suggestions come from when they're searching inside of the portal. So I'm gonna go ahead and speed up here because we're kind of coming up on time. So you have some change management things in here that I've actually never seen before. So you wanna make sure that you're having those conversations and reviewing what kind of settings you have available to you inside of your JSM. Because the interesting thing about how Atlassian rolls out their updates is they don't always tell you that they're gonna be putting something in. So you kind of want to keep your ear to the ground on what features are coming into your system so that when you're having these conversations or doing these presentations, that you're up to date on every single thing you're gonna talk about. So we already talked a little bit about who's gonna get access to your system. So you wanna make sure you're talking about what the customer permissions are gonna look like. And what the portal settings are gonna be like. So this is how it's gonna show up to your customer and how you're gonna be organizing your different requests. So you can see here that we have a portal group that's common requests. And we see some of those request types that we talked about earlier inside of this common request portal group. You want to decide if you're going to have email requests come in. And if that's the case, you have a special email request type that you can route into an issue type. So anything that comes to this ACP at tylerdemo2@atlassian.net account is going to come in to our email request type. Determine what kind of customer notifications you're going to get. If you want to connect it to any chat features, so if you have a Slack that you're going to want to provide support through, that's actually something that we do internally. We have a Atlassian support channel that anybody can ask their questions directly into. And then with Atlassian Assist, you can just add an emoji that's a ticket and it'll automatically generate a ticket inside of our JSM project. So we already talked about the knowledge base. And two other things here that I want to talk about that are pretty important is talking about your SLAs. So a lot of teams are going to have service level agreements and times that they are required to hit for their service. So you want to make sure that you're having a conversation and saying, all right, what are your SLAs? What is required by you? What does the timing look like for each of your request types, your issue types, and generally what is expected of you from your customers? And typically this is a more difficult conversation to have with them, especially when they don't already have SLAs. So you want to be prepared to set some time aside to specifically talk about these to make sure that they're, like you said earlier, hitting all of their requirements. And then the last section that I want to talk about in particular here is the automation section. And just run through one here for when you actually create the project and you have a group of people that are going to be assigned a specific request type. And so how we can do this is creating a trigger. So when this issue is created, and I have a condition, so let's say I only want my service test team to be assigned requests that have a particular field condition, and in that condition, it's going to be a particular request type. And I know that by showing some of this automation, it's opening us up for a lot of questions and a lot of opportunity to have some more in-depth automations built together, right? Because this is a really powerful feature of cloud, and now that everybody's coming off server, I think this is gonna be a hot topic, both internally for us here at KLNA, but also on a lot of other teams. So if we have it based off of the request type, and let's pick a good request type. So let's say guest Wi-Fi accounts are automatically gonna be assigned to a particular role. And how I can do that is I add an action. So I have a trigger, and then I have a filter that is only going to trigger when you are getting a get guest Wi-Fi account request. And then my action, I'm going to be assigning that to somebody. And I would definitely recommend going in and exploring what some of these actions are, because the automations are really robust. And in my case, I'm going to be going to assign this user to a particular role. And I want them to maybe have a balanced workload. There's a couple of different options here. And then the role I want to assign it to is going to be my service desk team. So anybody inside of that service desk team has an opportunity to be assigned that particular request that comes in.
And is the balanced workload like a sorting thing where it looks at the users in that group and tests how many things they have assigned to them?
Yep, that's exactly what it does. Yep. And inside of JSM, you actually have a report that will show you their workload. So you can go in and look at, all right, Johnny has 12 tasks, Tyler only has 2. It'll keep assigning Tyler tasks. Now, depending on what your team structure looks like, that might not always be the best option. And you might just have to go round robin, will just go on a circle, so.
Yeah, and like if people are finishing work at different speeds, like, yeah, maybe that's not a balanced workload, like somebody did 24 tickets and somebody else did 10.
Yep.
And the weight of tickets is hard to judge anyway.
Exactly. Then we just have to name it and turn it on.
He's named your automation.
I did in my
Okay.
automation.
I
Yep.
thought you were naming what you were setting up. It's like, wait, we did that at the very beginning. That's why I was.
Yeah. So now this automation would automatically trigger and try to assign it to a guest Wi-Fi account based on the users that we would have set up earlier. So are there any questions about the creation of this JSM project in general? Any comments on the?
The service level agreement is kind of a neat, unique to this domain kind of thing. I don't know all of the software management tool, but SLAs don't get represented that specifically. So I do like that, because you do run into that in that area. And then I definitely see, if you were to pitch this to a team coming from software, the request versus issue is something you really want to make sure hits home and how those are related. But otherwise, it looks like they use a lot of what they use in their other tools for cloud.
Yeah. Is there, here's a cool, good question. Is there anything that you guys feel like I missed, or something that you still don't really understand about Jira Service Management?
Seems like you've opened Pandora's box, because there is a ton of functionality here that we just don't have the time to cover in even decent detail, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is my full-time job, and I still run into stuff that I have never seen before, you know? Today was my very first day turning on a Jira Service Management board, for example.
What's like the one thing you want us to take away from this conversation?
So the one thing I would want you guys to take away is the idea that creating this project is about asking the right questions and sitting down and having the right conversations with people. Because at the end of the day, setting up these settings, that's click, click, click. If you're not having the conversations before, none of those clicks to set it up mean anything, and you're gonna end up changing stuff, wasting time, upsetting people. Because when you're creating a project like this, you want it to be as good as it can be and as adaptable as it can be too. That's how you get buy-in. That's how you have people happy with the services that you're providing or the project that you set up.
You don't want the confused minds to say, no, we don't need this.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I've seen that happen a lot too, that those growing pains become it becomes the fulcrum where the client basically says, well, we just don't need this. Because it's just not set up right and they're not seeing,
They're not using.
well, they're not seeing the benefit to them. And ultimately, if they don't see that benefit pretty early on, they're gonna be like, why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. More questions? Comments? Experiences creating JSM projects?
So this is, I have a question generally about last thing that I've been wondering for a while. Is there any way that you can make it so like someone on a project can, like on a Jira project, can do some of the administrative work just for that project?
So that would be the difference between the company managed and the team managed projects.
Okay,
So when you're setting that up, you determine which one it's gonna be. The company managed, which is most of our projects
Mhm.
internally, is gonna be managed by your Jira admins.
Mhm.
So in your example, me and Sam.
yeah,
But the team managed projects give some of that power to a project administrator instead.
okay.
So the answer to your question is yes.
Are you able to switch it to a team administered project when it's already been established as company managed? No?
No, not directly. There are ways to move the issues
Yeah, you'd have to do a migration and, okay.
in a,
You'd have to create a new project and migrate everything?
yeah, you'd have
Yeah.
to move everything over.
Okay,
You likely have to reset up a lot of things.
But
okay.
you don't have all the questions answered.
Hey, you have an existing project, done. Why do you need it to be team managed?
I have more questions on that vein, but that's more of a KLA thing at this
Okay.
point, so, yeah.
Just sneak up on Sam in the middle of the workday.
No, because they'll just tell you don't think.
Well, I wanna sneak up on Sam less often. That's the thing. That's the thing.
Job security is what that is called, Ryan.
Yeah,
See, now I'm
because you guys don't have enough to
imagining
do.
like Sam having to dodge ambushes and being like, you know.
But I hope I'm
standing
not
behind the
giving off
door.
that vibe that I'm not approachable.
No, you're very approachable.
Oh.
Have you seen how many Nerf darts there are out there?
No, that's true.
He gets
That's
bombarded,
true.
yeah.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lori.
Oh wait, before everybody drops off, can we get like a picture with our in-person and virtual people? Just so we can, you know, show Atlassian.
Oh, yeah.
Yannick, since you're all the way over there.
Oh, should I take?
Yeah, if we take it from this angle. we
Alright,
can
I'll just,
include-
I'll just come down there.
Oh, well, could you take the picture?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you want mine?
I've gone
No,
all the
my
way.
face.
We're
Sorry?
making it complicated.
You want it? Okay.
Tyler, if you stop sharing your screen.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You get more people on there.
Can we see the TV one? Took 3.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Before everybody drops off, I just wanted to point out that this recording will be made available on our YouTube channel. The link is posted in chat.